afternoon. My name is Toya Younger. I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, and as of last Friday, I think it was, the Interim Chief Diversity Officer at the Minnesota State College and University System. And I'm here today with my colleague, Louise DiCesare, who is the System Director for Transfer and Collaboration, to share with you a little bit about some of the work we're doing in the state of Minnesota as it relates to transfer, and we'll also be talking about our Smart Transfer Plan. But before we get started, I just kind of wanted to do a shameless plug for Louise, because Louise won't do this for herself, and I know it. But in this new monograph that you all received, there's a chapter written by Louise that talks a little bit about the Smart Transfer Plan and some of the things that she'll be sharing with you today in the presentation. So if you want to know a little bit more in detail than what's provided here in the presentation, please go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and get us started briefly, just kind of from a system perspective to provide some context into what we're dealing with in the state of Minnesota. I tease because I just moved to Minnesota last year at around this time for the conference, and so I had a whole lot to say moving from Washington, D.C. area to Minnesota. And I was teasing people and told them, you know, I've spent 18 years in D.C., and actually my very first job out of undergrad was working on Capitol Hill. And so I'm really connected to politics and just a complete political junkie. But even in all of my 18 years in D.C., I had never seen such political influence, particularly in higher ed, until I moved to Minnesota. Who would have ever thought, you know? And so as we go through this presentation today, you're going to hear a lot about some of these initiatives and things that we're discussing were, I would say suggestions, but that's not it. They were truly mandates, legislative mandates, and it's been challenging. I think that's one of the things that we find is trying to advance the work, trying to do things to help our students move seamlessly through our college and university system, yet constantly having this influence from legislators telling us what to do and mandating us to set up certain programs and whatnot. And so I think that this will be a beneficial session, not only to find out kind of how we're responding to it, but even for some states who are just now starting to have the state bring down more mandates and put forth more suggestions about what we should do to transfer. Hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions along the way. So to tell you a little bit about the Minnesota State College University system, we were actually three separate systems. It was a system of technical colleges, community colleges, and state universities. And while the merger happened 20 years ago, as you can imagine, people talk about this merger like it happened yesterday. So everything in every context of every conversation is, well, no, that was pre-merger, oh, that's post-merger. And so for somebody coming in new to the system and new to the state, I'm like, it was 20 years ago, get over it. But it really provides sometimes a challenge for us because you had these three systems who probably never wanted to be collectively together in one system anyway. So it's been a challenge trying to navigate through this system of three individual systems coming together. Once again, us coming together was mandated by the state and serving all sorts of students across the entire state. The MNSU system is comprised of 31 colleges and universities. 25 of them are two-year colleges and 7 of them are state universities. We are actually the 5th largest higher ed system in the country, serving over 435,000 students. So it is a massive system, and many of the institutions, of course, want their individual autonomy, but when it comes to things that might be of benefit, that's when they claim to be part of the system. So it's a real fine balancing act in some of the things we do. And sometimes it can pose challenges because we have these different types of institutions. So when we get mandates and things from the state legislature telling us what to do, it's like that one size fits all does not necessarily work because you're trying to fit this into a system of community colleges, technical colleges that are offering AAS degrees, and then also trying to get them all to be transferring to these 7 state universities. So sometimes it poses a challenge, but I think the benefit for us is that we have such a large system, and many of the thing that makes our system so great is that we are We educate the most students in the entire state of Minnesota, more than the University of Minnesota system. And we educate the most diverse population in Minnesota. There were some numbers that recently came out saying that if you look at MNSU in general, 70% of our students fall into one category, which would include first generation, low income, students of color, veterans. I mean, we are the open access opportunity for students within the state. And so that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on, and it's part of our mission. But sometimes, of course, that can also be part of the challenge as well. So one of the things that we kind of struggle with sometimes within our system and within the state, and I don't think it's just prone just to Minnesota, but across the board, what colors transfer changes, if you will. And so particularly in our system, a lot of it has been anecdotal. And so one of the things that totally blew me away last year, particularly in the last legislative session, I would get phone calls from members of the state legislature, and they're like, well, I'm calling because my constituent, John Doe, is a student at such and such, and he said his credits didn't transfer. What are you going to do about it? And so I'm kind of like, okay, well, you know, this guy is calling, that's fine, or whatever. And then we got into legislative session. All of a sudden, there were 10 bills proposed about how we have to take certain transfer credits. And I'm like, wait a minute, how are you going to tell us what we can take? And so, you know, they may hear one or two stories from transfer students who had difficulty or their credits didn't transfer, and all of a sudden it shows up as a bill on the Senate floor. And so we've really tried to make sure that we can provide data and provide more information so that people aren't having their view of transfer tainted just by different stories that they may hear from students. Additionally, there's a naive understanding of transfer. And I think all of us in higher education know the complexities of our institution, so you can imagine being at a system this large, the complexities that we face. But many of the folks in our legislature really think, okay, well, this should just be 1, 2, 3. You should go here, you can do this. And so they've put out a lot of legislative mandates for, you know, our 6120 credit program or things like that, thinking, oh, it should just be that simple, and they don't understand the challenges that we face day to day on our campuses. They don't understand, one of the things Louise will talk about shortly is, you know, they're like, oh, okay, we'll have to have these transfer pathways and it needs to be clear and students need to know. And then when we sit there and tell them, well, you do realize that our students change their majors every day. So while we can have all of this lined up and set up when they arrive on the first day, if they change their majors, of course they're going to have some difficulties. Of course, they may end up taking a course that they didn't need and whatnot, but they don't really tend to understand that. And so I think there's a naive understanding in general, particularly for us, of what transfer means and the complexities of it. And that sometimes makes it difficult for us to really do the work that we're attempting to do. There is always a belief that the legislation will solve transfer, and that's the word that they use, which is somewhat challenging because every time they come together, they're saying, well, we'll fix it. We're going to solve this problem. You all have a problem with transfer, so we're introducing this bill to solve it. And it goes back to what I was saying, is that there's just a naive understanding that they believe that one legislative mandate can solve everything as it relates to transfer. Additionally, and this is really the part that I kind of wanted to share, and I think it's somewhat unique to Minnesota. Prior to moving to Minnesota, I worked for a National Higher Education Association and traveled around to colleges and universities all across the campus, and I have never seen this statewide student association format anywhere except when I came to Minnesota. We have 2 statewide student associations, and they're comprised of student leaders from all across our campuses. So we have a community college state student association and a statewide university student association. And I'm telling you, these 2 student associations are probably the most powerful groups in our constituencies. They have more power, more influence, and truth be told, more money than our faculty unions. I mean, these students really kind of drive certain things, and members of the legislature listen to them, leadership council, our presidents listen to these students, and so they have really had a lot, particularly the Community College Student Association, of course, has really played a lot into influencing policies within our own system. talking to legislators, influencing legislative mandates and decisions, a lot of it has truly come from students. And while we appreciate getting the feedback from students, as we all know, working with students on a daily basis, they don't necessarily understand certain things within the transfer process. And so, you know, something will happen to one of their friends, and next thing you know, they're on the news in front of cameras talking about what went wrong, or they're standing in front of their legislature. And so it's been really interesting dynamic to watch the influence that our students have had, particularly as it pertains to policy and legislation around transfer. And then lastly, one of the biggest things that we found is we really have challenges when we're looking at our numbers of transfer, depending on if students are transferring within our system or outside of the system. And, you know, I'll be honest, when I first came to MNSU, I was excited because I thought, you know, this is so great. It's this large system. It's, you know, community colleges, it's technical colleges, it's state universities. Surely transfer will be easy here. They'll have it all lined up, and everybody, you know, of course, everyone from the community colleges will just transfer to those 7 state universities within our system, and that is so not the case. And so what we've really had to do is make sure that we align our policies and really make those connections between our 24 community and technical colleges and our state universities, so that we can make sure that our students stay within our system. When we've gotten some data and some feedback from our students as to why they may transfer to institutions outside the system or institutions outside the state, a lot of it has to do with the number of credits that we accept. And so we've found a lot of competition, as I think a lot of other people will or have, with privates. Some of the for-profits are more willing to take some of the credits, and so students view that as an option, and then things will either happen to them financially or academically, and then they end up circling back around. And so transfer is so I'm trying to look for the right politically correct word, but transfer is a very complex issue for us because we just have so much mobility throughout our system. We have students taking multiple classes at multiple campuses, swirling, reverse transferring, doing everything else. And so hopefully today's presentation will inform you about some of the things that we're doing to track some of these pathways, to track some of our students, and how we use data to inform the policies that we're doing, and also tell you a little bit about our Smart Transfer Plan. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Louise.
Hi, everyone. I appreciate you guys coming to one of the later sessions today. And when I saw that we were put in this huge room, I thought, okay, because last year, I really want to thank Toya, because last year she agreed, we both presented here about the Smart Transfer Plan. And we were put in a fairly big room, but there were people standing. And, you know, so maybe they were overcompensating this year. I don't know, but I think I'd rather have the smaller room, actually. But I do want to go back a little bit just to this map, because one of the things I've been thinking about with transfer pathways being so big, such a big issue, we have started doing that in Minnesota. But I was thinking about other states, like California, you know, it's this kind of long state. So I'm imagining there's colleges and there's a public university probably close to every cluster of colleges. Florida's kind of the same, you know, it's kind of a long, kind of peninsula state. And so it just seems natural that transfer pathways, you'd have students going from colleges and there'd be a university that's real close by. Minnesota's not like that. We have Minneapolis and St. Paul, huge metro area, and that's where a lot of our two-year colleges are. It's a lot of where our two-year students are. And then we have one state university in the metro area, which is Metropolitan State University, and then we have the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. We do have a couple of state universities that are near the Twin Cities, but the others are all kind of in greater Minnesota. So now I'm kind of wondering, what the geographic impact is on our transfer patterns, because in the metro area, a lot of those students are place-bound. You know, they're low income, they're working, they don't have a car. You know, there's some real barriers to them transferring out to greater Minnesota. So it'll be really interesting to see how that works out. I do want to take a little bit of time to just introduce myself. My name is Louise DiCesare, and I am the System Director for Transfer. I've been at the System office for about 10.5 years now, and prior to that, I worked at various community colleges. I started as a counselor, and have always been involved with transfer since 1990. So I did a lot of transfer advising. It's just something that I've been interested in my whole career, and I'm really pleased I've been able to stay with it all this time. So moving on, I just want to give you some brief history about legislation in Minnesota. This goes back to 1991. There was a law passed where we had to do more to improve the transfer of credits within, at that time, it was the 3 separate systems of technical, community college, and state universities. So they wanted us to do a better job. I have heard a story that it was a legislator's nephew or niece or something like that who went to a technical college and got an accounting degree, and then when they had a lot of trouble transferring to a state university, I have heard that that's what caused the merger, was a legislator's relative. So all of a sudden, you know, then they started, oh, we have to merge these 3 systems, and so that officially happened in 1994. So in 94, we had the development of what is called the Minnesota Transfer Curriculum. It still exists. It's a 10-goal area, 40 minimum credit general education package. And so the thinking I think they had back then, and again, it's getting back to that naive thinking, was that students were going to come to the 2-year college. They'd never taken a credit before. They would, you know, happily do the Minnesota Transfer Curriculum, happily get the AA degree, and then they would go on to the state university where they would do the last 3rd and 4th year, get their bachelor's degree. Everyone was going to do that, right? So the Minnesota Transfer Curriculum was designed kind of with that thinking. But, you know, I remember when I was going to transfer conferences way back, like let's say 15 years ago, the big topic then was, oh, students swirl and they go backwards. And, you know, we were realizing that students do not just do this lockstep process. And so they really never have. And now when we have all of these, you know, kind of incentives for students to do concurrent enrollment, testing, AP, CLEP, IB, military, international, you know, you can go on and on. All of that makes it even more of a complexity. And I was at a session yesterday where someone said, or maybe it was today, they think there's going to be a time where there will not be a student who comes without some kind of credit that they've already gotten from, that counts as higher ed credit. So it's just getting, you know, it's mushrooming in terms of its complexity. So anyway, then around 2001, so what happened was when they assumed that everyone was going to do a 2-year and then a 4-year, and then they realized that wasn't really solving it, and I love that, you know, it's like an it that needs to be solved, and any of us who work in transfer know that that's not true. It's very complex. But when they realized, well, that's not happening, students were still complaining. Then in 2001, they passed another law that said that it isn't just the entire Minnesota transfer curriculum that transfers to all the public institutions. Now it was even just a goal area. If a student completed one of the goal areas, every other public institution within our system had to acknowledge it. And each course had to transfer to any of our colleges and universities within our system. So I will just go back a little bit and say that the University of Minnesota was involved in this Minnesota transfer curriculum package deal in 1994. So even to this day, they will acknowledge the entire package. So they still do that, but they do not have to accept parts of it. Does that make sense? So it's only within our system that the goals and the courses also transfer per the sending institution. So what that means is if I go and take a psychology course and it meets goal 5, and I transfer to one of our colleges and universities in the MNSU system, the receiving institution has to count that course in goal 5. Okay? So it doesn't mean they have to say it's equivalent, but they do have to honor it as being part of that general education package. So then in 2009, another thing we did was an e-transcript process. And so this was really great because in the old days, a student had to go to their prior institution, please send my transcript to this other school. They had to pay for it. Well, now within our system, it happens automatically. As soon as a student is admitted into one of our other institutions, their transcript is sent, and also it's accompanied by an audit. So the receiving institution has access to it. They can see what goal areas were met at the sending institution, and they are supposed to count the courses in the same goal areas as what the student took them in. So then in 2010, believe it or not, transfer complaints continued. So basically, this is when the student associations, this is kind of like 5 years after I had been at the system office, and so I kept hearing complaints and different things like that. And I remember going up to someone in the 2-year student association, and I said, it would really be helpful if we knew exactly what the problems are. And then we can figure out how to solve them. Because prior to that, it's like Toya said, someone complained, they passed a law, they just assume it was going to work. And so what that led to was a survey that the system office did in coordination with both student associations. So from that survey, we implemented what's called the Smart Transfer Plan, and that's actually what we presented on last year. So like Toya said, if you're interested in learning more about that, it is in the book on page 17. So we implemented it. We started implementing it in 2010. And then in 2013, we repeated the survey. And we were very, very, very happy that every single category had improved. And so we can't really say that the Smart Transfer Plan is definitely what caused the improvement because the groups of students we were surveying were different. We had one group of students we surveyed in 2010, a different group in 2013. So you can't really say, that it improved or what caused the improvement, but I think that it's safe to say that at least you can infer that at least it had some influence on that. So just to give you a brief overview of what the Smart Transfer Plan was we have a situation, we're also a union state, so the faculty are unionized. And so we would hear complaints from students that a faculty would not give them the syllabus to have it evaluated. And so our faculty actually view the syllabus as their intellectual property. So some faculty would give it to the student, other faculty would say, nope, I'm not giving it. And so this was a big problem, as you can assume. So we decided that let's make the course outline the document of record. That belongs to the institution. So what we did with the Smart Transfer Plan is we started requiring every college and university to post their course outlines for every course they taught on their website. And we link it to the system transfer website. So that way, any student, they don't even have to ask for it anymore. It's right there. And I was interested in finding out that even private colleges in our area were using these outlines. And they were now able to go, they could do a course evaluation very quickly. And so that's something that we've been doing now for almost 6 years. The other major change is we use DARS in transferology, and we've been using it for quite some time. You know, the typical way a student transfers is they get admitted to the next institution, then the institution, the receiving institution, looks at the transcript, then they do the evaluations, then they put it in DARS. Well, what we thought was, how is a student going to plan for future transfer if it's only done after the fact? So we started asking our institutions to do these evaluations ahead of time, proactively, and put them in DARS. And that way, if a student is using transferology, they can plan. They can see, oh, okay, this course is equivalent at the next institution. So it would really provide that planning. Now, I will be honest with you, and I will say that not every institution in our system has complied completely with this. But we do believe that a lot of the Minnesota transfer curriculum courses have been evaluated, and that information is in DARS. The other thing that we did with the Smart Transfer Plan had to do with transfer appeals, because the survey showed students didn't even know they could appeal a transfer decision. And so we felt like, okay, we have to do a better job of getting the word out. So we started making sure it was on all the websites, and it was on their DARS audit, and as many different places as we could put that information. And not only can they appeal at the institutional level, but if they're denied at the institutional level after they've gone through the entire appeal process, they can also appeal at the system level. And so over the years, we haven't had very many that come to the system level, but we have had a few. So we've been trying to do a much better job of getting the word out. And the last pieces had to do with just general communication about transfer. And I think when you just heard the panel up here, some of them saying, you know, we didn't even know, and this and that. So we required every one of our institutions to have a dedicated transfer page on their website. But not only that, there has to be a link to it from their home page. So when a student goes on the home page, somewhere there's a transfer link, and that way the student can see it, hopefully right away. They can go to the transfer page, and then we have minimum information that has to be on the transfer page for that institution. The other thing had to do with improved training of advisors and counselors and what we call transfer specialists. So we added regional transfer meetings we also do a transfer orientation every year where we train new transfer specialists about transfer. We do a transfer specialist conference every year, and that one actually includes non-MNSU institutions. So we do all of those things as ways to keep the communication going. And I always tell people the communication is not one way. It is not just from the system office to them. We rely on them telling us what their concerns or how is this going to work. And I'm just amazed at how well that works because, you know, that's what it takes. Everyone sees it from a different angle. And if you listen to everyone, you're going to end up with a better quality product or process. I do want to talk a little bit about one group that we've had for a number of years, the Transfer Oversight Committee. And this is a committee that started out really only being faculty, but over the years we've changed it. So now not only is it faculty, we also have a couple of college staff who work with transfer, so the 2-year people, and then we have a couple of people from the universities that work with transfer. And we also have an administrator from the colleges, an administrator from the university, and then 2 of us that are from the system office. So now I'm going to shift to this thing about transfer appeals because Remember that in the Smart Transfer Plan, we found out students didn't even know about appeals, and it's been this constant process of trying to get people to know that if you have a problem, you can appeal it, which means you can ask for a reconsideration. And so in 2013, in the Transfer Oversight Committee, we just started talking about this. And I think they just about were fed up with it by the time we were done, because the more it was like peeling layers of an onion. We would start talking about it, and then it would lead to some kind of other thing. And so we'd research it, and then we'd find out something else. And one of the things we found that was, of course, maybe no surprise, but it was kind of a surprise to me, was how many different terms the institutions used for transfer appeal. I started looking into it, and it's like, okay, one college called them student appeals, another one called them an evaluation appeal, another one called it a transfer appeal, another one just called it an appeal. I mean, there were all these different terms within our system. So it was just even that kind of basic discovery of wow, you know, everyone's just doing this so differently. No wonder students don't know about it, you know? I mean, it was just one of those aha kinds of things. So we did want to, our goals about this was to learn from the transfer appeals. We're really trying to counteract the anecdotal way that legislators find out about transfer problems. And so, and by the way, the times that we've had transfer problems in the media, like either it's a newspaper article or it's on the radio or something, we look into them. Because if there's a student name and they said, oh, none of my courses transferred to Metro State, and you know, we look into it. We look at their DARs, we try to see, you know, what are they talking about? And I will tell you that out of every single one that we have looked into, there's only one that had any credibility. Okay? I mean, only one. And so here we are passing laws based on anecdotes and things like that, and they're probably not even valid. You know, here we're changing all these things, and maybe, you know, maybe it's for nothing. So we have this transfer appeal process. So what better way to start figuring out, here's information that we can use. Maybe it will start helping to inform us about what are the concerns students have. Is it because they're not, I don't want to say they're intentionally lying. I don't want to say that. I think a lot of times students genuinely just don't understand it. So they think that it's not working, but it's just because their perceptions or expectations about it are not fitting their preconceived notion of how it should work. So I don't think it's intentional deception or anything like that. So we started talking about it. We're trying to counteract these anecdotal kinds of things. Like I said, complaints tended to be baseless, and we started thinking this could be a really great source for data. So the Transfer Oversight Committee made a recommendation. Then it goes to this Academic Affairs Council where we present it there. They also supported this process. And so starting this past summer, we took a subcommittee of people from Transfer Oversight, and we also have another group that meets, that's a system-wide group of transfer specialists, and we call them the Transfer Advisory Group. So people from both groups started meeting and started talking through, and one of the first things we learned was the transfer specialists were saying, well, wait a minute. You know, when a student first comes to us and they're questioning something, it isn't an appeal. It's usually we just review it, and we can usually take care of it. And so it doesn't usually lead to an appeal right away. So this was very helpful to get that kind of feedback, because then it influenced how we decided to do the process, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So once we had a process pretty much figured out, we started meeting with IT, and we have been building this. And so we're in the process now where I think we're almost done with it, but we're still getting feedback to tweak it a little bit. And we hope to get it going hopefully by the fall. We also have vetted this with a variety of groups, the student associations, transfer advisory group, transfer oversight, faculty. We've been really trying to get people's perceptions about it. So when a student goes into, this is what's called e-services. When they go to register, this is what the student sees. And so you'll see that on the left-hand. This is not my clicker, so okay, good, I picked the right button here. You'll see that on the left navigation, there's a tab called Courses and Registration. So what we plan to do is put a new button right below that one, and it's gonna be called the Transfer Review Process. And so a student will be able to select that tab, and then it will start leading them to some kind of text. So if the student has if there's no record of transfer courses for that student, they will get a certain message. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the first thing they're going to do is it's going to tell them, look at your degree audit. So we hope this is going to be, very helpful. A student will look at their audit. They're going to be asked, do you agree or disagree with how your course is transferred? If the student agrees, that's it for now, unless they take any more transfer courses, that's it. They don't have to do anything else. But if the student disagrees, they're going to be given a form that we're going to call the transfer review form, and we're going to have a designated person at every one of our 31 institutions that will be managing, and they're going to be kind of the point person for this. So if the student hasn't transferred anything, it'll say there are no transfer courses that have been received, but it does also say if you've recently transferred courses, they might be in the process of being evaluated. And that was an important thing that we learned from our transfer specialists. They said, oh, wait a minute, maybe we haven't finished evaluating them yet, because that can take time. So it's just to let a student know, maybe wait a few weeks, check back again, and see if they've been evaluated. It also makes sure that they know that it's for that institution. The other thing is, because of e-transcript, this is kind of interesting. You make progress in one area, and sometimes it causes unintended consequences, because now that we have e-transcript, where the student doesn't even have to request that transcript be sent to the next school, then they think it's always automatic. They don't realize that if they're at school A, then they go to school B, but then they go back to school A to take a summer course, they need to tell school B, hey, I took this other course. They think it's all happening automatically. So that's been kind of an unforeseen glitch with e-transcript. So what we're going to put is a note that says if you take courses elsewhere after your transfer courses were evaluated, please notify admissions or registration. Now, I was on a conference call on Monday, and I got feedback from the transfer advisory group, and they were like, well, that's not going to work for us. We have this other process. And so now we're going to have to tweak this a little bit. But that's the good thing about vetting it with different groups. So it's going to give them that message of looking at their audit, saying if they agree, and we hope that this will give us some data, even for how many students agree, how many students don't agree. Then if they disagree with how their course is transferred, they are told that they can fill out a transfer review form. They are going to be able to see their list of transfer courses, and they are going to be able to select the one that they're disagreeing with and put it on the form. And so we encourage them to complete as much information as they can, But we also say if you need assistance, you can contact a transfer specialist. And then if they have more than one thing they're disputing, it tells them that, just use an additional field. These are the kinds of fields that we have thought of. I actually analyzed 400 appeals last summer that I got from several of our institutions because I really wanted to know the reality to help inform how to do this. And so these were all the fields that I could think of. So if it's a course that was taken at a prior institution, it asked them to put the name of the college or university where they took it, what was the course title name, was it semesters, or what semester did they take it, what grade did they earn, what term did they take it in, and then if they can attach a URL of the course outline or the syllabus or something like that to help, that's another thing they can do. And then if it's a national exam, they can check it. So none of these fields are required, and the reason is if it's an exam, the other fields would not apply. So they're just going to be allowed to write in a free-form comment field exactly what it is they disagree with, why they disagree, and then it always allows them to attach a copy of a syllabus or course outline or something like that. So if they go through that review process and it's still denied, whatever they were asking for is still denied, that's when they will then get a transfer appeal form. And all the information that was on the transfer review form will populate automatically on the transfer appeal form. However, they can always add more explanation. They can always attach new documents to this. And so then we wanted to respect the process that we have at each of our institutions. So remember when I said that it was like peeling back onions? Another thing that I discovered was, guess what? The appeal process is different at every school. So at some schools, it might be a two-step process where the faculty and dean make a decision, and then it goes to the vice president. If it's a denial, it goes all the way through the vice president. At another institution, it can be a four-step process. It can be faculty, dean, vice president. It can just vary from one school to another. So IT is building this in a way that we will not be interfering with any school's process. If it's a two-step process, that's fine. If it's a four-step process, that's fine. So that's going to be built in. But it will be prompting students, and I think this is really another improvement, because I've had students call me before and say, I'm upset because my course isn't transferring. And so I'll say, well, have you already gone through your college appeal process or your university appeal process? Oh, yeah, I've done that. And then when I check with the college or university, they say, oh, they only did the first step. And so, they have to keep going through. So a student doesn't always know that they've finished the appeal process. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to prompt them. So if they go through the first stage and it gets denied, then it's going to say, oh, okay, it was denied. Do you want to go to the next step? And it will sort of take them through until they exhaust the steps at their college or university. So let's just say that the appeal goes through all the stages, it's still denied, the student still thinks it should be accepted. We have the system level appeal process, and so it's going to prompt them to a new form where everything is going to be populated, and it goes to the system level. And so the vice chancellor, who Toya reports to, Ron, he gets to decide, and he is the last. Whatever he says goes. No one can appeal above him. So what we are really hoping is that there will be some proactive results and outcomes from this, so that we're encouraging students to look at their degree audit early in their process, rather than their last semester or something like that. And it also prompts them to, like I said, because of e-transcript, to be telling the school, you know, maybe that's what they'll discover. Oh, you didn't accept my psychology that I took last summer, where the school is like, oh, we didn't know you took psychology last summer. So we're hoping that it will solve those kinds of problems. And then we also prompt them to look at their future institutions. So for example, if this is at a community college where they're appealing, but they really intend to go to one of our universities, it's going to prompt them to think beyond that two-year college. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so this is the kind of data that we're really excited about, because remember how the legislature loves to pass laws, you know, based on hardly anything. One thing that's always frustrated me is that when a student complains, the assumption is it's MNSU to MNSU. You know, that's the problem, that it's transfer within our system. So what this is going to do is it's going to help us understand that. Is it really from within our system, or did it come from the University of Minnesota? Did it come from military? Did it come from international? You know, was it an exam? So we're going to start being able to have percentages of how much was MNSU to MNSU versus all these other categories. And that's something we'll be able to take to the legislature. You know, I don't know what it's going to be, but my dream is that we're going to be able to say that it's a very small percentage that's transfer concerns within our system, that most of them are from outside the system. And that's what my dream and my hope is, but I hope I'm not disappointed. So anyway, we have the type of category that we're going to be collecting. So if the complaint was, oh, it wasn't the right goal area, or you know, it wasn't a course equivalency, or it was a grade issue, or it was because it was upper division, the age of the credit, because you know, we have a technical college system where technical credits, even at a technical college, they have a policy that the age of credit is usually 5 years. So if a student goes to a technical college, stops out, and then it's 7 years later they go back, that technical college says, boy, your technical credit's too old. And so age of credit issues might come into play. That might be a reason or a category that we want to know. Is that the problem? And whether it's technical credit or not. Maybe that's what their appeal is about, the number of credits, et cetera. So those are all kinds of things we're going to be compiling. And we also are going to be asking about the accreditation of the source. And so when the transfer specialist is looking at the appeal or the review, they're going to be filling out, was the source credit regionally accredited or was it nationally accredited? And that's going to give us that data. What percentage of transfer complaints are nationally accredited courses and what percentage are from regionally accredited? So that kind of wraps up this part, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of other things. But does anyone have any questions about any of what I've talked about so far? Yeah.
I had a question. You said you wanted to look at those DARS reports really early in the process, which is really great. I'm from the University of Minnesota, by the way, so I'm really interested in all of this too. Do you worry with the language maybe, or asking them to agree or disagree really early? It might not be that they disagree with how their credits are transferring, they just don't understand.
That actually came up at a recent meeting that I was talking to transfer specialists, and we talked about it for a while, but the problem is we can't think of a better way to ask. So if you have a suggestion for a better way to ask, I'm very receptive. And you're right, it may just be they don't understand, but someone said, well, if we made it some other term, it actually might mean we get more of them. And that may or may not be a bad thing. It just might make it more confusing rather than clearer. So we just aren't sure. So if you have any suggestions.
No, we're showing you the same thing.
Yeah.
I'm not just trying to set you up. I was
No.
also just asking, like.
You're right on the same page with our group here, but I just think we're also going to try to pilot it if we can, and I'm going to see if we're able to pilot it at just a couple of schools first, and then we can kind of see what issues come up and fix them as we go. So, other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, have you developed your plan before, or is that something that each college will be doing their own version?
It is one form that IT is developing, and it really has those fields that I showed you earlier. So it's just going to have all those fields of, where did you take it, how many credits, what grade, blah, blah, blah. It's those fields plus a free form where the student can just type in what it is they're asking for. And we also want to make sure that the student is able to keep a copy. Because believe it or not, we had a situation last year where a student had appealed online, and it disappeared into the ether, and he didn't even get a copy of it, And so we're like, okay, well, that's not right. So we want to make sure the student is able to print it and keep a copy. And we're also going to require there to be a reason, because at the 400 I looked at last summer, there were some where there was not even an explanation of why it was approved, why it was denied. And so, we want to make sure there is a reason provided. So, yeah. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, and I'm realizing we only have a few minutes left here. So I just want to briefly talk about another law. And this law was passed because of our 2-year college student association. We had nothing to do with it at the system office. And what's really funny is that a lot of people seem to think the system office is behind everything, and we're really not. So this is something that took all of us off guard when this law was passed. And so it was like 2 years ago. So this law was passed, and the first law required us to develop a plan to develop pathways for AAAS. And we have AFA degrees in our system, Associate of Fine Arts. All 3 of those are designed for transfer. And so then this past spring, so last year, the first year, they developed a plan. And so guess what? In the spring, the legislator said, okay, now you have to do the plan. And so they passed the law saying you have to do the plan. And so then they added this part to it that we also have to develop bachelor degrees for AAS degrees, so Associate of Applied Science, which are not intended for transfer. They want us to look into what are pathways for the AAS degree as well. And so the goal is for these 2-year pathways to transfer to all 7 of our state universities. And right now we are in the midst of a pilot project where we're looking at 4 disciplines: psychology, because it's a very popular major, biology as an example of maybe a little bit more complicated science type of major, business because it has accreditation issues, and theater because theater is the one Associate of Fine Arts degree in our system that includes the entire 40-credit Minnesota transfer curriculum. And so we thought we would start with that one. And so we're working on those 4 right now. The ultimate goal is to develop about 30 of them. And so this is the legislative language that has to do with the AAS degree. So they wanted us to develop new BAS degrees in areas of high employment so that students with AAS can transfer. And keep in mind, remember, the reason for the merger of our system was this: a student who got the AAS and it didn't transfer well. So the AAS degree, and this is information I got from a national paper. It basically was talking about career and technical education as the fastest growing segment in post-secondary education. I didn't realize that. So I think that's why we're seeing this an issue more and more. I just went to a session today about AAS degree transfer. So, getting that bachelor's degrees can significantly increase the salaries. And, I was listening yesterday, they get paid a ton of money with an AAS degree. Well, that's true with some of them, but obviously not all of them. So a lot of times what we find is the student has the AAS, they get into that career field, and then their employer says, it would be great if you had a bachelor's, or they might decide they want to be a manager, and they can go back and get a bachelor's degree to help them do that. So right now, only a limited number of technical credits apply to baccalaureate majors, and a lot of times they only transfer as electives. So also an AAS degree only has about 15 credits of Minnesota transfer curriculum, general education, so most of it is technical credit. That's why it's not considered designed for transfer. But, all along, even if someone transfers an AAS degree, it doesn't mean they don't transfer. It just means, you count the 15 credits, maybe you count 16 credits of technical, but they're losing a bunch, because some of our AAS degrees are 72 credits. Some of them are even more than that. So, we've been trying to get them down to 60, but we even have an example of one that's over 110 credits in our system, so it's a lot. So, basically, these are the reasons that transfer of AAS is difficult, is because the structure of a baccalaureate degree limits the types of courses that can count toward the first 2 years. And, most transfer-oriented associate degrees are usually mostly general education. That's why they transfer better. So the other issue is the courses are different. And this is what it's hard to convince the legislature. Why is Intro to Accounting at a technical college not transferring to Intro to Accounting at the university? They think, it's the same title, it should transfer. This is the simplistic thinking a lot of people have, including students. It's the same name, why isn't it transferring? So it's that kind of thing that makes it tricky. It's not the same. The content of the course is different. So also, a lot of times they're concerned about the rigor of the course, and also it's hard to complete the general education after transfer because, they've already spent all this time at the 2-year college, they have their 15 credits of gen ed, then they go to the university, and a lot of times it's not easy to finish those additional 25 Minnesota transfer curriculum courses. So these are the kind of models we have for AAS transfer. This is national, so it's nothing unique to us, but one of them is the upside down, where they did their technical training. Now they're going to go to the 4-year and do their liberal ed requirements. So that's upside down. The other one has to do with management or business. So they have their AAS, they want to be a manager maybe. So when they go to the 4-year school, they are doing management-oriented curriculum. And then there's a career ladder which builds on whatever their AAS was in. And we don't really have a lot of that within our system, but it is a model that exists nationally. So another thing that's happening around the country, it's not happening in Minnesota, but it's where 2-year colleges are being authorized to offer applied baccalaureate degrees. So I know that's happening, I believe, in Florida and probably in some other states too. So what we're trying to do is develop more options where we can accept more of the technical credits. So and let me just add to that a little bit. What we've decided is that we want to have a model where 60 credits of an AAS degree will be accepted by all of our state universities. The state university can decide what baccalaureate it is. So they might decide to do a management model. They might decide to do a liberal arts model where it's that upside down. It's up to them which model they do, but we want every state U to have some kind of bachelor's degree where any AAS degree will transfer. And so that's where we are with it right now. We're writing a report to the legislature, so maybe next year or in a couple years I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about where we are. But I know we're kind of out of time, but does anyone have a question? Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us with this, and if you have any questions or anything later, please let me know. And this is my contact information. It's also on your copy if you have any questions. And if you didn't get a copy of the handout, I'd be glad to email you one afterwards. So thanks a lot.